In the vast, sun-scorched plains of Montana in the late 1800s, where the wind whispered secrets through the golden grasses and the mountains stood like silent guardians against the endless sky, Elijah Hawthorne reigned as the unchallenged king of his sprawling ranch, a man forged in the fires of hardship with a jaw set like granite and eyes that pierced like the barrel of his trusted revolver, his life a solitary symphony of cattle drives, dusty trails, and the occasional brawl in the dimly lit saloons of Silver Creek, but loneliness had crept into his bones like the chill of a winter storm, prompting him to place an advertisement in the eastern papers for a mail-order bride, seeking not just a companion but a partner to tame the wildness of his world. And when the stagecoach finally rattled into town one crisp autumn afternoon, kicking up clouds of red dust that danced in the fading light, out stepped Amelia Sinclair, a vision of refined eastern elegance with her auburn hair pinned in a neat chignon, her emerald eyes flashing with a mix of defiance and vulnerability, her lace-trimmed dress a stark contrast to the rugged leather and denim of the frontier folk who gawked at her arrival. And as Elijah approached, his boots thudding against the wooden platform, his heart skipped a beat at the sight of her porcelain skin and the subtle curve of her lips. But Amelia, hardened by a past of betrayal in the bustling streets of Boston where her family's fortune had crumbled under her father's gambling debts, lifted her chin and declared in a voice as steady as a loaded gun, "Touch me, and I'll leave," her words a warning born from the scars of men who had seen her as nothing more than a prize to be claimed. And Elijah, with a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, nodded, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder, "Fair enough, darlin', but we'll see how long that holds," for he was a man who called bluffs in poker games and life alike, sensing the flicker of uncertainty behind her steely gaze, and thus began their uneasy union, sealed in a hasty ceremony at the town's weathered chapel where the preacher's words echoed hollowly against the pine walls. And as they rode back to the ranch in his creaking wagon, the silence between them thick as molasses, Amelia clutched her valise tightly, her mind racing with plans of escape should he prove untrue to his word, while Elijah stole glances at her profile, admiring the way the setting sun painted her features in hues of gold and crimson, wondering what fire burned within this woman who had traveled across the continent to marry a stranger. And upon arriving at the ranch house, a sturdy log cabin nestled against a copse of aspens whose leaves rustled like applause in the breeze, he showed her to her room, a simple space with a quilted bed and a window overlooking the corral where his horses nickered softly, and true to his promise, he kept his distance that first night, retiring to his own quarters with a tip of his hat and a murmured goodnight that left Amelia tossing in her sheets, her body tense with anticipation and fear, the scent of pine and leather lingering in the air like a promise unfulfilled. And as days turned into weeks, Elijah set about integrating her into ranch life, teaching her to ride with a gentle hand on the reins, his voice patient as he explained the nuances of saddling a horse, never once brushing against her skin, though his eyes lingered on the way her dress hugged her form when the wind pressed it close. And Amelia, surprised by his restraint, found herself drawn into the rhythm of the land, her hands blistering from churning butter and tending the garden where wildflowers bloomed defiantly against the arid soil, her warnings fading into half-hearted reminders whenever he drew near. But Elijah, ever the strategist, began to call her bluff in subtle ways, leaving wildflowers on her pillow with notes scrawled in his rough handwriting that spoke of the beauty he saw in her spirit, or preparing meals by the fire where stories of his youth spilled forth like whiskey from a bottle, his laughter rich and infectious, chipping away at the walls she had built around her heart. And one evening as a storm brewed on the horizon, thunder rumbling like the hooves of a stampeding herd, they sat by the hearth, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Amelia, emboldened by a glass of cider, confessed the pains of her past, how her betrothed in Boston had abandoned her at the altar for a wealthier match, leaving her to the mercy of mail-order catalogs and desperate hopes. And Elijah listened, his calloused hands clasped in his lap, resisting the urge to wipe the tear that traced down her cheek, instead offering words that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. "You've got fire in you, Amelia, more than any storm out there." And in that moment, she felt the first crack in her resolve, her body leaning ever so slightly toward him, the air charged with unspoken desire. But still she whispered, "Remember my warning," though her voice lacked its former conviction. And Elijah, with a knowing grin, replied, "Oh, I remember, but bluffs are meant to be called." And as the rain began to patter against the tin roof like 1,000 tiny drums, he rose to stoke the fire, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the sinewy muscles honed from years of wrangling steers, and Amelia's gaze followed him, her pulse quickening at the sight, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the flames. And in the days that followed, the tension built like a coiled spring, with Elijah finding excuses to be near her, helping her mend a fence where their hands nearly brushed, or guiding her through a waltz in the barn to the tune of a harmonica he played with surprising skill, his breath warm against her ear as he hummed, never quite touching but close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. And Amelia, torn between her vow and the burgeoning ache in her chest, began to question her own boundaries, her nights filled with dreams where his hands finally claimed her, gentle yet insistent, awakening sensations she had long suppressed, and one fateful afternoon, as they rode out to check on the herd, a sudden downpour caught them unawares, drenching them to the skin as they sought shelter in an abandoned miner's shack atop a ridge, the thunder clapping overhead like the crack of a whip, and huddled together for warmth, their clothes clinging transparently. Elijah turned to her, his eyes dark with intent, and said, "You've warned me plenty, Amelia, but I reckon it's time to see if you'll really leave." And before she could protest, he leaned in, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that tasted of rain and longing, his hands finally touching her, cupping her face with a tenderness that belied his rugged exterior, and Amelia, instead of pulling away, melted into him, her fingers threading through his wet hair, her body responding with a fervor that surprised even her. The bluff called and shattered in an instant, their embrace deepening as clothes were shed in the dim light of the shack, the storm outside mirroring the passion within, Elijah's calloused palms tracing the curves of her body with reverence, eliciting gasps and moans that echoed against the wooden walls, and as they lay entwined afterward, the rain softening to a gentle drizzle, Amelia whispered against his chest, "I suppose I wasn't bluffing after all."